Soft strings, the sound of footsteps on dusty stone, a dawn wind moves across a hillside. In the pale light of morning over the Judean hills, a boy named James wakes to the murmur of a small town coming alive. His home is Nazareth, a place so ordinary most travelers barely mark it on a map. Yet it's where stories that change the world have a habit of beginning. James is not the firstborn in the house of Joseph the builder and Mary his wife. That honor belongs to Jesus, the older brother whose quiet strength and depth always seem to steady the room. In that simple household, tools hung neatly, timber stacked against a wall, the smell of fresh bread and olive oil, James learns work, prayer, and patience. The days are filled with hammer blows and the call of sparrows, with festival journeys to Jerusalem and evenings when Joseph tells the stories of Abraham, Moses, and David as a soft fire dances in the hearth. From the start, James watches Jesus closely. There's something about his brother, something like a river running underground, unseen but powerful. Jesus works, he laughs, he helps, he prays. He says little, but when he does, the words settle in James's chest like seeds. Pause. Then Joseph is gone. We aren't told exactly when, only that the home tilts in his absence and the elder son shoulders the weight. James, still young, sees Jesus take on the role of provider, protector, and teacher. The family learns to trust God in the grief. It's the first time James senses that faith isn't an idea. It's a path you walk when the ground under your feet gives way. Years turn. James grows into a capable young man, hands strong, eyes steady. He knows the scriptures by memory, the Psalms by heart. He has the habits of a devout Jew. He keeps the Sabbath, he attends synagogue, he fasts, he prays. And he has a brother whose life is marked by both simplicity and mystery. Then the river breaks the surface. Jesus leaves Nazareth and begins to teach. Rumors reach the town first, whispers of a baptism at the Jordan, a voice like thunder, a dove descending. Then come the stories. A wedding where water blushed into wine, fishermen leaving their nets, a leper cleansed, a paralyzed man rising to carry the mat that once carried him. Nazareth buzzes until Jesus returns, stands in the synagogue, and reads from the prophet Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." For a moment, the room is held in golden stillness, and then it shatters into fury. The same town that watched him grow tries to push him off a cliff. He passes through the mob like a shadow slipping between flames. James is left with a knot of questions. He loves his brother. He also struggles to understand him. And he isn't alone. The family at first doesn't believe. They urge Jesus to come home, to stop stirring up trouble. They go looking for him when crowds crush in so tightly that Jesus can't even eat. His mother stands outside a house. James stands with her. Someone says, "Your mother and brothers are here." Jesus replies, "Who are my mother and my brothers? Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." The words sting like cold rain. James feels as though a door has been closed in his face. Beat, low drum. But James keeps watching. He sees reports multiply across Galilee and Judea like sparks on dry grass. Blind eyes open, sinners are welcomed, storms go quiet. Dead girls wake up laughing. A friend named Lazarus walks out of his tomb, and the tension with the authorities tightens like a knot behind the ribs. James hears the gossip in market stalls and the anger in council chambers. He hears the riddled parables that roll off Jesus' tongue. Seeds and soils, shepherds and lost sheep, banquets and narrow gates, and he suspects these stories are keys to doors he hasn't yet tried. Then comes Passover. The family travels with thousands of others to Jerusalem, the city that breathes scripture from its stones. James moves through crowded alleyways, scented with lamb and smoke, past pilgrims chanting the Psalms of Ascent, up towards the temple that shimmers in the sun like a mountain of snow. He knows the festival rhythms. He knows the songs. He doesn't know what waits on the hill outside the city walls. In a single brutal spring week, the world tips. Jesus is arrested at night. There are whispers of betrayal for the price of a slave. There is a trial that's a mockery of justice, a crowd whipped into a frenzy, a Roman governor washing his hands while ordering the death of an innocent man. James watches from a distance as the procession goes by. He sees his brother staggering beneath a crossbeam, blood stippling his back, women weeping along the road. He cannot get close. He cannot help. On Golgotha, the hammers fall. The sky darkens at midday, as though creation itself can't bear to look. James hears that Jesus cries out, "Father, forgive them." And later, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." When it is finished, he is gone. Grief doesn't arrive alone. It brings shame and confusion as companions. James is crushed beneath all three. He endures the Sabbath like a man staying still in a burning house. On the first day of the week, rumors start again, this time louder, stranger. Women, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, the other Mary, claimed the tomb is empty, that angels spoke, that Jesus is alive. The apostles are wild-eyed, incredulous, then slowly, dangerously hopeful. James doesn't know what to do with hope, not after a cross. And then, quietly, simply, Jesus comes to him. We're not told where, we're only told that it happened. Then he appeared to James. Picture it, a room or a rooftop, a courtyard or a path along a wall. James hears a voice he can never mistake. He turns. There is the face he knows better than his own, marked by suffering yet shining with the life that seems to come from the other side of the dawn. The brother he once misunderstood stands before him, not as a memory, not as a dream, but alive, risen, unkillable. Everything shifts. The door that felt closed is thrown wide. The thorn of offense dissolves into wonder. James falls, not only into his brother's arms, but into faith. He believes. Soft swell. From that day, James follows not merely a brother he loves, but a Lord he worships. When the risen Jesus gathers his followers and breathes peace on them, James is there. When he ascends from the Mount of Olives and a cloud receives him, James is there, eyes straining at the sky, waiting for the promised Spirit. 10 days later, Pentecost detonates, wind in an upper room, fire that doesn't burn, words rolling like rivers in languages never learned. The small community of Jesus bursts outward into the city like a storm breaking a drought. 3,000 souls are added in a day. The fellowship forms, prayers, meals, generosity, teaching, signs and wonders. The church is born. James, once hesitant, becomes steadfast. He prays, he leads. He listens more than he speaks, but when he does speak, his words carry the weight of a man who has lived the sentences he is saying. Persecution rises. Peter and John are arrested, threatened, released, arrested again. Stephen preaches and is stoned. The young Pharisee Saul stands nearby, approving. Believers scatter like seed on the wind, and wherever they land, new life springs up. The church learns a paradox. The more it is pressed, the more it expands. Then the sword falls even closer. Herod, Agrippa the Worm, keen to please both Rome and the local elite, decides to deal with these followers of the way. He arrests James, the son of Zebedee, another James, one of the 12, and executes him. The shock is electric. This is the first apostle to be martyred, and it makes one thing painfully clear. Leadership in Jerusalem means living with a target on your chest. And yet, James, the brother of the Lord, does not step back. He steps forward. As the years pass, his reputation settles around him like a cloak. People call him James the Just. They say he is devout, a man of prayer, a man whose knees are as hard as a camel's, from hours spent in the temple and in quiet places, interceding for his people. He keeps the rhythms of his ancestors while holding to the gospel his brother proclaimed. He doesn't see law and grace as enemies. He sees them meeting in the person of Jesus, fulfilled in him like a promise kept. James becomes a pillar of the church in Jerusalem, alongside Peter and John. When the fiery persecutor Saul encounters the risen Christ on the Damascus road and becomes Paul, he eventually comes to the city to meet the leaders. He meets James. It's not an easy friendship at first. Paul burns with a mission to the Gentiles, convinced that the good news is for all nations without distinction, and that circumcision and the full yoke of the Mosaic law must not be placed on non-Jewish believers. Others disagree, some fiercely. The church faces an argument that could shatter it before it reaches its second decade. So they gather in Jerusalem for what history will remember as a council. The room is thick with tension. Stories are told. Peter stands and describes how the Spirit fell on a Roman household just as it fell on them at Pentecost. God made no distinction. Then the eyes of the assembly turn to James. He does not thunder, he reasons. He doesn't play politics. He opens the scriptures and shows that the prophets foretold a time when the nations would seek the Lord, when the fallen tent of David would be raised and widened to make room for many. And then, with a steady voice, he offers a judgment that saves the fragile unity of the church. Gentiles will not be required to become Jews. They will be welcomed by faith in Jesus, asked only to abstain from practices that would fracture fellowship with Jewish believers, things tied to idolatry, blood, and sexual immorality. It is a wise, generous, pastoral decision, and it bears James's hallmarks: fidelity to Scripture, honor for tradition, and a heart tuned to mercy. From Jerusalem, letters go out. Congregations far away read James's words and breathe easier. The road of the gospel stretches like a ribbon across the empire. Gentle guitar, the mood turns reflective. Sometime along the way, James writes his own letter, the short work we now call the Epistle of James. It's not a treatise, it's a mirror held up to the soul. He cares about faith, not the kind you recite, but the kind you practice. He speaks to scattered believers facing trials, reminding them that tested faith grows endurance, and endurance grows maturity. He tells the wealthy to look at their riches and remember how quickly flowers fade. He tells the poor to lift their heads, for God has chosen them to be rich in faith. He refuses to let the tongue go unexamined. Blessing and cursing from the same mouth? Not on his watch. He confronts favoritism in the assembly, urges mercy, calls for wisdom from above, and insists that faith without works is dead, not because we earn God's love with deeds, but because living faith inevitably moves our hands. If you listen closely, you can hear the memories behind his phrases. A brother who told stories about seeds and harvests, who blessed the poor, who called for peacemakers, who warned about hypocrisy, who washed feet, who carried a cross. James doesn't quote Jesus often. He echoes him constantly. In the years that follow, Jerusalem seethes. Political tensions churn like a riptide. Heavy taxes, corrupt rulers, zealots with daggers beneath their cloaks, prophets of revolution. The temple gleams, the city frays. James stands in the middle of it all, respected by many, resented by others, revered by some as a holy man who prays for the peace of his people, targeted by those who fear the authority he carries. And then comes the day when that authority is too much for his enemies to tolerate. It is around AD 62. A high priest named Ananus, ambitious, sharp, eager to consolidate power, seizes an opportunity during a gap in Roman oversight. He convenes a council, summons James, and levels a charge. Accounts vary in the details, but the shape is clear. They demand James deny that Jesus is the Messiah. Instead, James climbs to a high place, some say the temple pinnacle, and, in a voice that carries across the courts, confesses Jesus. A cry goes up. He's thrown down. He falls, battered but still alive. As men rush at him with stones, James kneels and prays for them, the habit of his life condensed into his final breath. A blow from a club ends it. James dies as he lived, just, steadfast, merciful. His blood becomes one more line in the long story of a people who overcome not by the sword, but by faithfulness. Long pause. Then a warmer tone returns. But a life like James's does not vanish. It leaves a pattern, a path for others to walk. What did his life teach? First, that proximity to Jesus doesn't guarantee faith, but it makes faith possible. James grew up with the Son of God and still struggled to believe. Yet when grace broke in, he let it undo him. If you've lived near sacred things and still feel empty, James says, it's not too late. Turn, believe. Second, that prayer is not a spare wheel, it's the steering wheel. James didn't treat prayer as decoration. He wore grooves in the floor with his knees. His letter ends with practical counsel. If you're suffering, pray. If you're cheerful, sing. If you're sick, call the elders. If you've sinned, confess and be healed. He believed that heaven bends towards the cry of the humble. Third, that faith shows up in the everyday. James's wisdom isn't mystical fog, it's street-level reality, bridling the tongue, paying workers fairly, welcoming the poor with honor, keeping yourself unstained by selfish desires. He teaches us that holiness is not an attitude, it's a way you treat people. Fourth, that unity requires courage and generosity. At Jerusalem's council, James found a path that honored Scripture and kept the door open for the nations. He refused the easy extremes. He held tension with grace. In an age addicted to outrage, his steadiness is a gift. And finally, that martyrdom is not only how some die, it's how all believers live, daily, quietly, offering ourselves to God for the good of others. James's final prayer for his killers wasn't a performance. It was the harvest of 1,000 secret prayers planted over years. Music softens to a close, acoustic guitar and low strings. So when you hear the name James, don't picture a shadow at the edge of greater stories. See a man who learned to follow Jesus from the inside out. A brother turned believer, a skeptic turned shepherd, a pillar who held a community together, a writer who refused to let faith go limp, a martyr who turned his last breath into a blessing. In a small house in Nazareth, a boy once watched his brother fix a door so it would swing true. Years later, that same boy, grown into a man, helped hold the door of the church wide open so the nations could enter. Through prayer, wisdom and courage, James the Just left it on its hinges. And to this day, pilgrims of every tongue are still walking through. Final beat. If this story stirred you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next journey into the lives behind the scriptures. And if it helped, share it with someone who could use a steady word today.